Good afternoon, everybody. We've got some more breaking news hot off the presses, and this one, once again, concerns coaching. Concerns the coaches of the Seattle Seahawks. This one has to do with a coach added, not a coach subtracted, so that's cool. Obviously, with some of the recent departures from the Seahawks coaching staff, there are openings to fill, and the way in which the Seahawks choose to fill those gaps is going to be telling. And we still don't know how they're going to fill the gaps left by Idzik and Curry. But this first hire is hopefully, I think hopefully anyway, because I kind of like this, indicative of how they're going to fill the gaps going forward. So Dave Canales has been replaced on the Seahawks coaching staff by Greg Olson. No, not that Greg Olson, not the announcer Greg Olson, not the disappointing tight end who proceeded to leave Seattle and talk bad about Pete Carroll a lot, so of course he wouldn't get hired as a quarterback coach. No, not that Greg Olson, another Greg Olson. So, this guy's been around for a long, long time. This guy's been coaching for almost as long, I think, as the other Greg Olson has been alive. It's pretty close. So, no, not that Greg Olson. Let's talk about this guy a little bit here because there are a couple different layers to this. I think the first and quickest reaction that you can have to this hire is it's not in-house. He was part of some Washington-based football teams in his past, but this was not in-house. This was somebody outside the organization who we are bringing in. And I think that's probably good. I think it's probably indicative of the fact that when you decided, you or not decided, but needed to fill a gap on your coaching staff, you didn't go, okay, who do we have in house who we can just promote? Who makes sense for a promotion now? No, you went out and went, okay, let's get the best guy possible. Let's look everywhere and try to find the best guy possible, the best fit. And you determined that this is the guy. The fact that you went outside your own organization and looked for a guy who you thought could be beyond what you were getting before is encouraging to me. I like that. So, Greg Olson, welcome aboard. Now, we're going to have to take a look at his resume here, but it's a very long resume, and analyzing every single step of it, I mean, that could take all day. So I'm going to highlight a few things as we move through it. But yeah, this guy's been coaching in some capacity for a long time now. Hop on over to Wikipedia, and I mean, look, graduate assistant was his start with the Cougars. So for those of you older Cougar fans in the audience right now, maybe you remember him. Probably not, honestly. But that's where he got his start. Before I was born, he was working as a graduate assistant for the Cougars. And from there, he went on to have notable success in many different locations, including Central Washington, where he coached Jon Kitna. Jon Kitna went from a player who was playing for Central Washington to a player who actually had a long and relatively fruitful NFL career. So that's a big accomplishment right there. So Greg Olson right then and there shows his mettle, his ability as an offensive coordinator. He went to Idaho for a few years to be a quarterback's coach. Then he was a quarterback coach at Purdue from 97 to 2000. And I think you guys know what that means. Yeah, he was coaching Drew Brees. Drew Brees was the Purdue quarterback when Greg Olson was the quarterback coach. So that is a big feather in the cap. That is a big headline in that resume. Drew Brees under his tutelage in college. Then he went to the 49ers for a year, 2001. He had Jeff Garcia under him at that point. Jeff Garcia turned in a Pro Bowl season. Now, Jeff Garcia turned in other Pro Bowl seasons in other years, so I'm not going to pretend like Greg Olson made Jeff Garcia. But regardless, successful stint at San Fran. Went to Purdue for 1 year as a tight ends coach, which that's kind of an interesting step back, isn't it? I don't know what to make of that. But then the next year he's back in the NFL as the Bears quarterback coach. Then he spends a couple years as a Detroit Lion offensive coordinator and quarterback coach, not having as much success through this part of his career, admittedly. Then he goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to be their quarterback coach for a couple years. I think with Josh Freeman, if I remember correctly. He was also their offensive coordinator for a little bit. Assistant head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Offensive coordinator for the Raiders for a couple years. Offensive coordinator for the Jaguars. I mean, this guy, he must be trying to set a record for being involved on the coaching staff of as many teams as possible. And admittedly, some of the stops that I just went over are not exactly the most appealing. But then you get to 2017. Jared Goff's first good year, first full year in the NFL, occurred with Greg Olson as his quarterback coach. So, I mean, Goff's a good quarterback. He's had other good years too, but that was his breakout year. That was maybe the best year he's had. So, I'm going to call that another feather in the cap. Then he spent a few years with the Raiders as an offensive coordinator, and then he went back to LA this most recent season as a senior offensive assistant. So, that is a varied and complex and many-faceted resume for any coach. There's some really good stuff there. There's some bad stuff there, too. He definitely had some stops on some pretty lackluster teams, definitely coached some pretty lackluster quarterbacks that didn't really develop. But I look at this overall and I say, this level of experience, this level of connections, these many connections he has with this many different teams and this many different players, you got to say, if you give him good stuff, he's probably going to make something pretty good with it. Now, again, this is not an offensive coordinator we're hiring him as. We're hiring him as a quarterback coach. And it's often hard to know what a quarterback coach is really doing, right? Like, I don't think very many people would say Greg Olson is the guy to give credit to for Goff. People would say that's Sean McVay. So you factor that in and you're like, okay, well, how much credit are we really going to be giving his quarterback coach when we know that Sean McVay is this QB whisperer who got a Super Bowl out of Matt Stafford and has had all this success with a quarterback like a Jared Goff who admittedly hasn't done a lot of winning games outside of having Sean McVay as his coach. But as near as I can tell, this guy is at the very least accomplished. Now, many of his best accomplishments came more than 20 years ago. That is a concern. And I can definitely point to some of the stuff that happened in here that is not great. Although I would say, being the offensive coordinator for the Raiders for those 4 years, not bad. Working with guys like Derek Carr, post his Derek Carr's major injury that definitely zapped some of his effectiveness as a player. So, overall, it's a mixed bag of stuff, right? You've got some really encouraging things in his resume and some really not so encouraging things. But I like the experience level. I like the fact that we're hiring him from outside the organization. I mean, it's another Rams coach we're bringing over in a manner of speaking, although, granted, he was with the Rams for 1 year, and then previously, like 5 years ago, he was there for 1 year, so it's not the same as bringing over guys like McVay and Dickerson. But this seems encouraging to me for at least a couple different reasons. We'll see if it works. He has big shoes to fill because Canales did his job well, but this seems like a pretty accomplished guy, and I'm definitely encouraged by this. We'll see how we fill our other vacancies, but this is one vacancy filled. Whether or not we move forward with Geno, Drew Lock, or a rookie, it seems like there's reason to believe that this is the right guy. See you guys later. Go Hawks.